Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits. Joining me today is David Corke to talk about the human side of relationships. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Alex. It's great to have a conversation with you.
So, as we're starting off, I was wondering if you could please share your superhero origin story.
Uh, there's always the hesitation, isn't there? I think perhaps if there is one, I believe it's really my interest in people. I'm interested in other people more than my own life. Sometimes it fuels my drive, and I want to meet more and more people and find out what makes them tick.
That's a great summary. In the context of nonprofits, then, I'm curious to know how you get started working with them. Like, what is your, where are you today, and how you got there in the
Sure.
nonprofit world?
Sure. Well, I'm a bit long in the tooth. So I've had a long career. First career out of university was in the service industry. So I'm a service professional, food service essentially, and hospitality. So I worked 20 years in that sector, really delivering what people want or what they're looking for, and interested in what they're looking for. So by extension, you want to know who they are and why they're making the choices they make, and that's that interaction in the service industry that I thrived in because of my interest in people. From a long career in the food industry, wanted to change my life and had a great career in the service industry, but really was unsure where to go next. Interestingly, my interest in people drew me into a volunteer opportunity working for a community-based seniors organization, and something as simple and straightforward as being a friendly visitor for a senior citizen that lived in our neighborhood. It just gave me a chance to explore my interest in people. From that opportunity developed a chance to move into the nonprofit for the first time, and that was in that organization. It was again a seniors community support organization in a neighborhood in East Toronto in Canada. It really allowed me to periods of time to work and get to know people, not just my colleagues but the clients. And I very quickly moved into fund development and how do we raise money to do what we wanted to do and accomplish for these people, these clients. It was the business model that I was seemed to be most comfortable in, and that's where I'd been for 20 years. The segue, and perhaps that has had the most impact besides learning about the nonprofit, was the job that carried me from Toronto to London, Ontario. So I was employed by a friend, a colleague who had been with the United Way. He was a allocations director. And he had left the United Way and started a project called the Prevention Dividend Project, which looked at investments and the return on investment. It moved us from Toronto to London, and I was doing the research. So here I was, a private sector business person in the nonprofit, learning about interventions, cost benefit analysis, but I was in the realm and the world of people, right? Now the relationship piece. So when I moved to London and through that work in the research project, I met some funders and they got to know me as a person and my interests professionally and my abilities. And they knew of an organization in London that was struggling. Interestingly, it had a skills development organization that had some food and food related skills development programming. So it was a connection with my previous employment, but also my interest in effectiveness, service delivery. So essentially, I was hired. I was introduced and hired into this organization. It is the organization where I'm currently the executive director, and I've been here 23 years. I entered as a program manager, and 3 weeks after I entered, not unlike many small organizations, nonprofits, there was a crisis moment. I didn't even know that was in crisis when I joined, but the executive director walked out one door and I was asked to be executive director, almost by default. So when I think about it, there has been a long time, and I'm sorry, but a long line of learning for me. But across the line of learning, I've carried my interest in service, but also the business acumen that requires the resource and the ability to fund the work you want to accomplish.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And I love the expression long in the tooth. I think it comes from beavers, actually, which is another Canadian popular animal. Okay, so today you're executive director. The relationship part really is what fascinated me in our pre-conversation because I have the sense that you spend a lot more time focusing on the importance of the relationship side of the human side of things, at least more than the average person these days, especially given technology and the pace of things and the whole thing.
Mhm.
And what was fascinating to me was the ability of just making sure we don't lose that, and maybe even emphasize it more than we really should be doing today. So I'm curious to know, based on all your experience, what would you say is the current state of relationships these days in the nonprofit industry?
In my experience, and probably not unique to me or any our organization, is the feeling that the work in front of us is so overwhelming that it doesn't allow the time to explore these relationships that may bring other value to your work. It's a sense of being overwhelmed, perhaps. Lift your head from the desk is an old expression. I guess I'm fortunate in that I've seen a return on the investment of the time that it takes to make relationships qualitatively work. And I see that as a value. People may say, why would you waste your time doing that if in the end they observe that the relationship didn't deliver a return?
Right.
So I think generally people are feel they don't have time or they don't see the return on that.
That's actually one of my questions I was going to go toward next. And the idea of relationships, person to person, it takes time, right? And
Hmm.
there's an investment, time management, resources, money, even, and the result might not be worth it. And so there's a sense of a perception, at least, that nonprofits have to do more with less, and they have to be more at scale, and sending out mass emails or mass texts to people rather than pick up the phone or even meet someone in person, which I don't think happens that much anymore, unless they're a major donor or something like that. But there's a sense of making sure that the time you invest in building a relationship will actually pay off in some way versus just investing and then wasting time. So how do you kind of like figure out where a happy medium is, or are you all into it's always better to go deeper and then figure out later whether you should pivot or not?
I think the answer to that question for me is really relates to the environment where I'm doing this. So it's about scale, I suppose. But for me, making the decision about the investment of time in a relationship is more easily to assess and undertake and evaluate afterwards if it's in a closer proximity to our work. So I have a tendency to be a leader of our organization and do our work of our organization and my own personal involvement in from a center point and then concentric circles out. So we create so it's a qualitative decision related to close connections. And then as much as you have capacity to be successful in developing quality from those relationships or outcomes that serve both of these people in this relationship. So it's a co-benefit model. As much as you have capacity to go out in concentric circles beyond your center point where your organization rests, whether it's a neighborhood, a community, a city, a region, I think that's how I make those decisions. But it's always starting by close association and working out.
When you use the word qualitative decision, could you give a definition of that so people understand exactly what you mean by that?
A successful qualitative relationship or outcome is where there's co-benefit. There has to be in any relationship, whether it's a business relationship, a community partnership, a marriage, a friendship, there has to be it's quid pro quo. There has to be co-benefit. You have to understand the other perspective, and perhaps maybe that's the imperative, and that's how it starts best is to not say, "Here I am. This is my name. This is what I like to do. How do you like me so far?" It's more important to say, Alex, who are you? What are you interested in? What do you like to do? What are you trying to accomplish? What does your organization strive to do? I think in the nonprofit and in any sector, likely, most people are most interested in the work that they do and are consumed by it, not surprisingly. And in a day of in the time of technology and volumes of information, it's easy to be overwhelmed and say, I'm only going to think about what I do as opposed to what someone else does. But I'm always surprised, Alex, when I ask people about themselves, sometimes on a personal level. I want to know them. And then you understand their motivation, and then you understand their work, and then you're able to think, wait a minute now, in a relationship, whether it's a program, an experience, an undertaking, what would they get? What would I get? How does that work? And it's not always transactional because sometimes you don't get that. You know what I mean? It's not always a net sum equation. You sometimes undertake these relationships and they don't work, right? But it should always start, and I find I always try to start with understanding and listening the other perspective. It helps me understand, indeed, for the organization that I work for, what the return might be or the potential for a return to support the work that we want to accomplish.
Hey, Alex here. I want to take a brief moment and thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode so far, please consider sharing it with someone who would also benefit from its insights. It's these kinds of referrals that really help the show grow. You can also show your support by making a small donation. I don't do corporate sponsorships or product placements, so I rely on your support to keep the show going. You can visit my website, agentsofnonprofit.com, and click Support Us in the top menu. Thank you kindly. And I love that starting point to say, instead of introducing myself and telling you what I want, I flip the script, or you flip the script to say, tell me more about you first, and genuinely listen. I got that sense that you really pay attention, you really try to figure out what they're about, what they're motivated in, or what motivates them, and then decide if there's a opportunity to have some kind of collaboration. And it makes sense that, I mean, to me, actually, all relationships are a sense of transactional relationships, in that if you realize at some point in time that there isn't a transaction that can happen, some exchange of some, when I say transaction, I mean some kind of exchange. I receive something and I give something, whatever that something is. But at some point, there has to be a decision to say, okay, this doesn't seem to be a fit in any kind of capacity for a transaction. Therefore, it was a pleasure to meet you and we can move on. Yeah, thoughts about that. I'm curious to know your thoughts.
Yes, yes. I think you understood what I was saying. I'm not disappointed when it doesn't work out, but then we don't agree to part. I could tell you an example of that. It was an accidental. It ended up in an accidental community development initiative that was hugely successful, and indeed a local producer made a documentary film about it. It was so accidentally successful, but it started just coincidentally. Our organization moved from one location into a new neighborhood in our city, and being who I am and my curiosity, I noticed that there were a reasonably large number of social service organizations, including the local food bank and some other organizations, a disability service provider, a community resource center, within 1,000 yards of our location. So I just reached out. I didn't know these people, and I wanted to introduce myself. Got to know them through a phone call or an email, and then invited them over to our office, where, fortunately for us, because we're culinary educators, we had a beautiful kitchen and the ability to make a wonderful coffee and bake some pastry. So we met on a Friday afternoon, and all we talked about is who we were, and not about our organizations at all. And then we found it was almost like a support group. I got to know them as people wonderfully. Didn't take too long. We discovered that is on a Friday afternoon we'd had more than enough of the work of the week, and we're perfectly content to have a pot of tea or a glass of wine, or in those circumstances. From that grew the desire to do something that didn't serve any of our organizations uniquely or specifically. It was just an accidental model of, well, we like hanging out, we like each other. What else could we do besides having tea on a Friday afternoon? So we ended up doing, within a city program, a park cleanup in a local park that had previously been decades before the city dump. We ended up working with environmental organizations. We planted hundreds of trees. The attention to this long lost, low priority park in a to be honest, a socially, economically very challenged neighborhood where we were, was that the city raised their head from their desk and said, oh, look at this. And the park went from priority of 207 in the city to second. And the city said, we're going to invest in this park now because it's apparent that the community and your organizations are paying attention to it. Interestingly, 5 years later, we still do this work. We still meet twice a year and clean the park up. We still have tea from time to time, though not always, because some of us have moved on. But the success of that piece came accidentally out of just a relationship that started just almost spontaneously. Good. I mean, it's good work, right? And frankly, it still entertains me, selfishly. We're allowed to enjoy our work, I guess, and our relationships.
I think actually that's the root of it is you realized at some point during that initial conversation that you're actually enjoying the conversation for what it is without any particular end goal in mind. And it was through that that you were able to build that relationship and then decide at that point, okay, how can we continue this kind of working together or collaborating or figuring things out, and that kind of organically evolved, which is a beautiful story, by the way. And I think it's lovely. But the intention, I think what I wanted to underline was that you were going into this with an open mind, a curious mind, as you mentioned. And the idea is that I don't necessarily need to get anything out of this. I'm enjoying the moment for what it is at this moment. Whether it leads to something greater or not doesn't really matter, because the enjoyment of this moment with the tea or the wine is what matters.
Yeah, exactly. And it's the distinction for me, and this is just my personal perspective. It's qualitative, not quantitative. A long time ago, I read a book. The author Bill McKibben. I don't always agree with some of his perspectives, but the book was called Deep Economy, and it's about the resilience and the strength of small economies that exist within close relationships and qualitative production that's localized, and relationships are localized, and the impact is localized and qualitatively very strong and impactful. So when people say, Dave, these kinds of things you undertake, these relationships in close concentric circles to where your life is or where your organization is, I mean, how would you ever scale that? And I said, it scales qualitatively. It doesn't necessarily have to be citywide, regional wide, countrywide. I guess it could be shared. The model could be shared with other organizations. This approach, this philosophy, it's like creating a fabric rather than a tower, a huge economic juggernaut. It's really about creating a fabric of relationships, but it's a really strong qualitative model. It makes my organization more resilient, and I think our communities more resilient.
The issue of scale is an interesting one, actually, because
Mhm.
I fully appreciate the human side, the connection, that spending the time with these individuals, building these kinds of relationships. But not every moment, nonprofits don't always have the moments to be able to do this, right? They sometimes often have pressures and demands and so forth that they have to be able to balance these kinds of things with being able to reach out to donors, being able to reach to various organizations, build partnerships. And there's a sense, I believe, of urgency, constant. That's a constant sense of urgency throughout this whole experience. So how do you, I mean, is there a way to scale this kind of deep connection to a point where you're able to sustain the organization and make it grow and get all of those funders and funding and partnerships at the same time? Or is it a matter of deciding that these kinds of individuals we can, not kind of, these people we can spend that time with and allocate that amount of resources versus maybe the small donors, for example, will just have to send or be happy with sending SMS and emails in mass? Like,
Mhm.
where's that balance, and is there a balance?
I guess I could only speak from our perspective or my perspective. So the way that we operate and the way that I do my work and I'm able to accomplish those things as you query is by keeping our organizational model simplified, not as complex. I see many peer organizations our size who are, as you describe, are constantly seeking out funders, writing applications, yes, trying to establish relationships that will bring revenue or activity to their organization and scale and grow what they're doing. It almost, for me, it feels like growth for the purpose of growth. For us, and in my particular circumstance, I mean, 15 years ago, there were 7 employees in my organization. Now there are 20. Fully 45 to 50% of those employees and my colleagues work in our organization and are entirely self-funded through enterprise. So our organization is a training organization and it generates revenue. We're a nonprofit, but we're not a charity. So we don't seek donations. And I have to be honest, I haven't written a grant in about 10 years. But we're not a huge organization. We're fully successful and self-funded to about 45% through self-generated revenue. We're Canadian. We're Red Cross trainers. We provide Red Cross training. We provide all manner of fee-for-service training, usually in partnership with regulatory organizations. But what that allows me is to develop an organization that has a ring of leadership around me. And really, to be honest and direct, my role is to do those things that you asked. When do you have time for those things? It's because I've chosen to do those things rather than become a charity, compete with my community partners for the same grant that the city's offering this spring. You know what I'm saying? I've created the space, not just because I enjoy that work and that's my perspective and interest, but I've created the space to allow it to happen. It's sort of we've self-actualized what we want to do. And it's a very simple model. It's not complex. We're at risk, by the way, because the other 60% or 50% of our organization is indeed a government funded organization to provide employment services. Year over year, their annualized contracts are always at risk. So there is risk in our organization. The question is, how quickly can you pivot? If something happened from a funding perspective, what would be the solution for you? That's why I say I have in the past written grants. We have done that, but like any grant, it's usually short, programmatic, comes to an end just about the time that your clients and the people you serve begin to rely on the service. I'd much rather own the resources and the ability to generate resources to provide services within our own ability to do so without it being cut off.
And I appreciate the fact that you found a model that works for you. I think in general, too many people in life overall, they get caught up in what they hear is possible versus what is actually possible. And they just believe there's one way to do things
Mhm.
versus being a little more intentional with the direction that you're setting for yourself. And when you do meet people like that who have said, I don't necessarily want to subscribe to the model that everyone else does. I want to create my own path, try and trailblaze or whatnot. The idea of figuring out what works for you and for your organization, and then allowing you to do the things that actually mean the most to you and to the community that you are trying to help.
Yes, thank you. Yes, that's a good evaluation of how it works. I'm enjoying towards the latter part of my career now, and with this organization, I'm enjoying the freedom to be able to experiment with this idea and continue to experiment with it. We've had enough success that it builds, again, the strength and resiliency and the ability to adapt if things don't go quite the way we want. I'm very fortunate that way.
Yeah, and that's enjoyment is to me should be always part of the equation. To be meta for a second, do you offer any kind of training on how you got your organization to where it is? Like, is there that kind of training, or is it that's not even part of the scope?
It's not currently. About 10 years ago, there was a lot of interest in social enterprise. Certainly in the United States, it's a huge interest in sector. Canada, less so. And about 10 years or so ago, there was a lot of work done nationally to teach people about those enterprise models. I attended several conferences and provided breakout sessions. But embarrassingly, honestly, Alex, I was always embarrassed to talk about money in the nonprofit sector, in as much as I'm staring at a room and I start with "I love money." And the horror in the audience. But I have to say, and then I say, timing's everything, but I say for what it can accomplish. And then the question is always for our entire sector. It's not, we know what we want to do, we know what we want to do, or we have a very good idea of what it is that we want to accomplish. How are we going to fund it? How are we going to do this? Where's it going to come from? Are we going to compete with each other? I'd much rather compete in the marketplace and have a customer determine whether we've provided value or not, and then pay for that, a return on their investment. It feels good at the end of the day. It's like when I was in the restaurant business serving someone a wonderful meal. They chose what they wanted, but we delivered. It's not unlike that. So I would, because not for profit doesn't mean no profit.
Right.
You have to be able to fix your roof if it's leaking.
I'm curious to know your perspective on some of the barriers that come into play when building these kinds of meaningful relationships. And I think we talked a bit about it, like this sense of, is it a matter of a scarcity mindset? Is it a matter of just mismanagement of resources? Um, or is it technology or just desire? We've kind of alluded to a couple of these topics, but I'm curious to know, from your perspective, what are those barriers to be able to build those kinds of relationships? Like, if there's a hesitancy to spend time to build deeper connections with people
Right.
because of a scarcity mindset, or a we have to make it money, get money, money, get money,
Hmm.
you lose track of you lose the focus rather of where you should or could be allocating your time. If building connections for you works really, really well, you found a way to make that work, right?
Yes.
But a lot of organizations and other people might say, I can't do that for various reasons. And I'm curious to know if you have an experience of what those reasons are and maybe some ways around those.
I think again, it's only the perspective that I have that's developed over time, and that is the strength of the colleagues that you build within your organization around you enable you to take the time and the risk. Technology also, I believe that you're interested in that aspect. There, interestingly, we've come a long way. Self-deprecating Dave talks about himself having an abacus and a quill pen. It's not, I'm not quite that old, but I think the way of the world and technology and the way things are changing, and if I think about organizations of similar size to ours or circumstances that are similar, I want to believe I'm not I want to believe that the efficiencies that come with technology, like the one we're experiencing right now, you're in another country and we're having a conversation. I think that will lend itself and continue to lend itself to time and the time that would take and the willingness to undertake the risk. Whether it's AI tools or whether it's the technology that allows us to communicate or social media platforms that tell your story for you rather than you repeatedly trying to. I mentioned going to conferences 10 years ago and doing breakout sessions. It would be entirely different if I was doing that now through this technology. I think that things will continue to evolve and allow people to. I would encourage them to take the risks, build the strengths within your organizations, but then utilize the new technologies to the extent that they provide the freedom you need to undertake those deep dives into the relationships that may really deliver outcomes and metrics on the things that you want to achieve.
I like the team aspect. I think building a proper team around you, I mean, no person is an island, right? You need to have good people, determined people aligned with your mission around you. That's a definitely big part of a great way to accomplish great things. Technology too. I mean, we could talk about that all day. It's one of my favorite topics. But my question was more along the lines of, like, you have been able to be successful, at least in the past several years, by building deeper connections with people and being really curious with people.
Mhm.
But I think there are a lot of people out there who find it challenging to do this. And I'm curious to know if you, like, have you been able to, like, what is your opinion about what those challenges are? I mentioned just a matter of time or focus or, like you said, lifting your head from the desk. A lot of people don't do that. They're so head down. They're so focused on that. It could be a viable reason why they just don't feel the possibility or understand they don't feel the possibility of being able to do that. Like it's not even a question in their mind of, we need to spend more time building deeper relationships, and here's how we do it by doing less of this and more of this. So it's more a matter, the question was more a matter of, what blocks people from doing that today? Like, why don't we just drop everything? Or why doesn't everybody everywhere just drop everything and build deeper, meaningful connections with people? Like, what is that? What prevents organizations and people from doing that?
I wouldn't wonder, as you're speaking, I wouldn't wonder that perhaps those people, and it's never too late to make those decisions, and this was a midlife career transitioner speaking, that they're in the wrong business. The most wonderful thing about people are the people. So I don't come to the work that I do, the work that you described that I would encourage people to undertake or try or risk or find a way is I can't imagine doing the work and not being interested in the activity itself. It's I'm sure, I'm entirely sure, because I know very likely there are people even within my small organization that are probably in the wrong sector. You know, we accidentally move through our careers, but what is of greatest interest to me has always been people, whether it was in the private sector, in the restaurant business, in the senior citizen that I was visiting when I entered the nonprofit, the people that work around me in the organization that I'm fortunate to lead now. So I wouldn't, I'd find it curious to people to say, I'm too busy. I suppose those kinds of people might thrive in a larger organization, perhaps in the public sector, where they can be very successful and satisfied in their work. But in the nonprofit, at the community level, with these interactions and iterations of what we have to deal with, whether it's with a funder or a community partner or a client standing in the hallway outside of my office, you have to love what you're doing. You have to be able to, it's not just, do I have the time? Can I undertake this risk? Do I start this relationship? My question is, how much am I going to dig this? This is going to be enjoyable today. It's not always, but honestly, it really what motivates me the most.
I
It's
love
the
the fact that it's for you, it's self-evident. This is why I wanted to have this conversation with you, is because it's so simple, right? And I think it's sometimes refreshing to remind ourselves, hey, we're here building connections with people because we want to build connections with people. And that's really the source of everything.
Apologetically, I thank you for that because I'm embarrassed by the simplicity of it, and I sound selfish when I say it, when I hear myself say it. But it really, for me, is the return on the investment. We've had a couple of conversations. I find you fascinating, and I'd like to know more about you, to be perfectly honest. So, in as much as that exists for me every day, it doesn't matter whether it's a client who's coming in for services or it's a funder. It's just I'm more interested in, you know, it doesn't start with, hey, what's your favorite color, Alex? But I mean, it's, you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? Yeah, small is beautiful, and it's really the nuances of what interests me the most. It makes my work easier, and I sound flip and self-satisfied. I'm not. Work is hard, life is hard, right? But um, I like enjoying it as opposed to the alternative.
I totally agree on that one. Yes. You mentioned AI at one point.
Mhm.
I know you're not a big technologist, but I'm curious to know, because you do have a very different perspective on things. How do you see AI fitting with all of this conversation? Like, is it something that is it a tool that you believe that can help build better connections? Is it something that is going to get in the way and maybe or muddy the waters? What is your overall perception of AI and where things are going in the nonprofit world?
I see it as a tool. It's a toolbox, part of a toolbox. I think increasingly and surprisingly, we were told, oh, gee, only a year or so ago, be prepared for this. This is something you're going to use, and we're telling you you're going to use it, and you'll be astounded how effective it can be and helping you accomplish what you need to accomplish. We weren't using it, so with some skepticism, and technology, has a great capacity to underdeliver and overpromise in my experience. But I find I find that I'm actually starting to appreciate the efficiencies that it creates, although I'm still bemused by by in the human environment, in social services, in the work of humans and human communication and human services, the humanization of technology, or the attempt to. I was reading an article this morning about parenting, and they were talking about it was the perspective of parents, and a parent was quoted, and they said, "When I need an answer about parenting, I Google it, but when I want information and emotional support, I use ChatGPT." And this parent said that they use ChatGPT when they're unsure how to really appreciate or evaluate or value the information that Google would give them. Because it comes, the ChatGPT, once they get to know you, apparently, I'm just learning this, is they become aware and sympathetic to your perspective. And so they're very accommodating and they give you answers to your questions that are gently delivered or supportively delivered. So when I think about our work and the work in the nonprofit, I wonder if in the future, it's speculative for me because I have to see it in practical terms actually work. But whether there might be a chance that those kinds of technologies can actually help humans as opposed to just providing a list of resources, it'd be an interesting evolution. And I don't think humans could ever be replaced in human services. And I don't know if technology could ever become humanized, but it could be a supportive tool that lends itself to delivering messages that in a way that is human.
I
Does that
appreciate your
make sense?
insights. Yeah, thank you. This has been great. I really appreciated this conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. I was hoping you could share with people if they have additional questions or want to learn more about your organization, how can they get in touch with you?
Well, I guess simply Google London Training Center in London, Ontario. There's a London Training Center in London, England, so that's not us. Much appreciation for their work, but we're a different country and a different sphere. So, London Training Center, David Corke. If you Google me, you will find me. I think that's a good way to do that.
Awesome, Dave. Thank you so much for joining me today, and thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you very much.
All right, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again in the next Agents of Nonprofit.